agoraphobia is something I've encountered with people dozens and dozens of times, especially since COVID happened. And this, as soon as I tell you this next thing, you're going to be like, no, that's BS, right? But it's the total God's honest truth. Agoraphobia is something we definitely can teach somebody to be able to learn to live without. It is one of the simpler forms of anxiety, in my experience, to help somebody learn how to live without it. That said, it does take a couple of months to actually apply the right strategies consistently to get it done. But what I've learned with agoraphobia, okay, what my first suggestion to you is going to be to look at agoraphobia from a different lens than you're probably used to. So it's not that what you're experiencing is not real. Of course it is, right? It's not that what you're experiencing isn't a real experience, but very often people tend to look at agoraphobia as, okay, well, I have agoraphobia. And what comes along with that sort of way of languaging it is we tend to believe okay, well, I guess I'm just going to be agoraphobic indefinitely, right? Kind of for the rest of my life, right? There's this sort of presumption that it's a part of who you are. So here's the definition that I use, and this is for any type of anxiety I'm helping somebody learn how to overcome, and that is that anxiety is a conditioned pattern of response in your nervous system. So the key words being conditioned and pattern. So it doesn't have to be a lifelong thing. However, it will continue to be a repetitive conditioned response until we train your nervous system to do something differently. Okay, so the first step to getting rid of agoraphobia is we always have to there's really three main phases. Phase one is what we call pattern identification, which is what I'll start you with today. Phase two is what we call pattern interruption, and then phase three is pattern replacement. Okay, so the first phase is pattern identification, which really means we just have to decode what your particular pattern of agoraphobia is, because I've seen 4 or 5 variations. And that helps us start to help you see exactly kind of what strategies you need to start to use to lessen it and to make sure it's not showing up as much, okay? So with pattern identification, here's what we're gonna do. Top left box in this grid is gonna be left blank. Okay, top center box we're going to label as agoraphobic or agoraphobia, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and then top right would be the emotion or the feeling that you'd like to replace the agoraphobia with. So content, happy, some peaceful, right? Something kind of in that area is typically common. Is there one that kind of stands out for you that you would desire? Yeah, absolutely. Confidence. Yep, we'll label that confidence. So there are 3 main big elements to any emotion or any feeling, and that's what these rows represent. Okay, so it's kind of an imperfect metaphor, but if you think of, say, ingredients, right? So if you wanted to bake a cake, you might need flour, sugar, and eggs. All right, so if you put in a certain amount of flour, certain amount of eggs, certain amount of sugar in a certain way, you're going to get a cake. If you do those same ingredients, but you change the amount and how you use them, you're going to get a dry biscuit, for example, right? Very different outcome depending on how you manipulate those 3 ingredients, okay? So the very first ingredient for any type of emotion is what your brain selectively focuses on. So how you're going to label this, okay, is in that left-hand box there, first row down. Okay, we're going to call that focus / deletion, or you could say focus and deletion, same difference. Okay, so the very first thing that your brain or your nervous system does that creates how you feel is this process we call focus and deletion. Okay, so the simplest way to describe that is that in any given moment of any day, your mind is selectively fixating on a certain piece of data, for lack of a better word. Okay, so some people go through their day and they're thinking about the things that they're grateful for. Some people are hung up on their to-do list. Some people are imagining bad things happening in the future. Some people are regretting the past. Some people are thinking about someone they're in love with, right? So those are all different focuses that we have. And what happens is our brain becomes trained over time to have very selective focuses that have a corresponding feeling that we will feel as we focus on those things. So I'll give you a simple little exercise with this. What I'd like you to do is just bring your attention right now to your body temperature. So think about, kind of notice, like, do you feel hot? Do you feel cold? Just right? And just kind of be aware of that for a moment. And chances are you'll notice some sensations in your body that you were not aware of 60 seconds ago, right? Like until I brought your attention to it, true? So now bring your attention to your to-do list, like things you got to get done in the next 48 hours. Think of all the things you got to get done. Okay, and as you think about that, chances are you're going to notice an increase in stress, right? So you notice how I had you change what you focused on 3 times, and as we changed what you focused on, it changed what you felt. So the first big takeaway I want you to get out of this conversation is focus equals feeling. In other words, if you have a repetitive, ongoing feeling that you do not like, that you are experiencing on a regular basis, the very first thing that's making that possible and making that inevitable, I should say, is that your mind is going through a repetitive, habitual focus. I like to think of focus as kind of being like the ignition switch in the car. So the ignition switch is not necessarily, like what causes the car to move forward, right? But the engine is not going to start unless you turn the ignition switch. So in a very similar way, anxiety or agoraphobia can only be activated in the human nervous system by your mind focusing in a very particular way. Okay, now for the sake of saving time, because I've done this exercise several, dozen times with agoraphobia people, the most common ways in which agoraphobia starts typically is one of 2 main patterns. Either one, your mind will be constantly analyzing and measuring how far away you are from home and consistently kind of trying to keep like a mental tab on like, okay, well, how do I get home and what's the fastest route home and how many minutes or how many miles or how far away am I? So you're sort of like contemplating that like ever-growing distance from home. Or you'd be imagining something bad taking place in the imminent future, like having a panic attack, fainting, getting in a car wreck, something of that nature. So here's what I want you to do in the agoraphobia focus box there, okay? So let's just write down number 1 and number 2, okay? So number 1, and this is probably the order it tends to go for you as well. So number 1 would be distance from, quote, safe space, okay? That's your first focus. And then the second focus would be what we simply abbreviate to be future plus fear. Essentially contemplating something bad is going to take place in the imminent future. What that means is that you have what we call a VAK nervous system, okay, which means visual, auditory, kinesthetic in that order, which essentially means the way your brain processes information is the images or movies first, and then it adds auditory language on top of that, and then you feel kinesthetically a particular feeling. Now, all of that will happen inside of a few milliseconds, so it's happening very quickly. But the relevancy of that information to you is you will be able to activate feelings like confidence or calm or peace of mind by simply training the brain to rehearse visualizing a situation going how you want it to go. So essentially the important part there is like the visual part is the very beginning of the pattern. So for example, just try a little exercise with me real quick. I want you to imagine visually, I want you to kind of see in your mind's eye that you end up going to your fiance's place and you drive there feeling great, feeling safe, feeling like just happy, like, listening to your tunes or whatever, just having a good time. And then you like go there, you have a great time, you feel totally safe, you feel totally present with her, you have a great evening, right? And you're just totally at home, totally at peace when you're there. And just visualize that kind of playing out like a movie in your mind and how good that would feel. Now, how do you kind of feel as you rehearse that in your system? Yep, absolutely. It totally makes sense that it's skeptical. And I'll tell you why. This is another little good writer-downer, and that is repetition equals belief. Okay, so what has happened is your mind will do a series of rehearsals of like, well, this is how it's going to go, and this is how it's going to go, and this is how it's going to go, right? You'll visualize that thing taking place dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of times. And with every single repetition, your nervous system doesn't really know the difference between what you vividly imagine and what is actually real. That's the good news and the bad news. So that means that when you mentally rehearse something going badly hundreds or thousands of times, your nervous system becomes convinced that that's what it is. When you do the opposite, right, then you'll end up feeling confident, right? Confidence, like if you think of confidence, can you remember a time in the past when you really felt confident, even before you had achieved something? And what position were you best at? So when you were hitting, right, and you were feeling confident, like just kind of remember a time when you were feeling confident, when you were, about to swing. Chances are you were imagining it going well, right? Like you were imagining in your mind, like, okay, I'm going to hit this thing, like clear out of the park or whatever. You remember that, right? And maybe you were even kind of talking to yourself that way, like, okay, let's go, let's do this. What you're doing there is you were focusing on, let's jump over to the confidence box, okay? What you were doing there is what we call future plus desire. Okay, but the key here is it's future plus desire, but you're not focusing on it like, oh man, I hope I hit the ball, right? Because that would be hope. If you were just focusing on the future that you desire, that's the pattern of what we call hope. That creates a very particular emotion in the nervous system. But what creates confidence, right? Like, no, this is happening, is you're imagining the future that you desire as if it is already done. Okay, so what creates anxiety is imagining the future you fear as if it is already a done deal. What creates confidence is imagining the future you desire as if it's already a done deal. And what made you so good at baseball is because you were literally training your mind. You may have not known you were training your mind, but you were doing so as you were getting good at the sport, because you were mentally rehearsing batting well again and again and again and again. And then as you rehearsed it, you batted well. And then as you batted well, you further had reinforcement to imagine that it was going to go well. So it was a virtuous cycle. Anxiety creates a vicious cycle, right? Where you imagine it going badly, and then it goes badly. And then when it goes badly, you go, oh man, it went so badly last week, it's probably going to go bad this time too. So there are several components to this process, like I said, right? But at least we got to fully flesh out that first one for you. The bare minimum of what you can do is start to train the brain to visualize things going how you want them to go. That would be the bare minimum of what you could do, and that alone will reduce the anxiety levels, okay? Typically for somebody dealing with your type of anxiety, it's usually very straightforward for us to get that handled within about a 90-day period, sometimes even shorter than that. I literally had a guy, he had agoraphobia for 25 years, going on 30 years, I believe. But we thankfully were able to get it under control for him. And it took us right about 3.5 months. And I did a full interview with him. And I'm going to send you that video because I want you to kind of get some takeaways from his, like what it was that we did, that kind of helped him out, and then you'll get some good feedback from that, okay? So his situation was, it was so bad for him, he had never even left his like little 15-minute radius of the town that he lived in. One of the big milestone that we accomplished for him was he went and did like an overnight, like week-long trip away from his town, and that was like, his huge thing, because he literally was just, he lived and worked 5 minutes from each other, and that was it. Like he just had, that was his little comfort zone space, and he kept just going to the same like little restaurant like all the time and all that stuff. So anyway, you'll find the story pretty powerful and get some good ideas from that, okay?